Okay, friends, orange spice tahini turmeric protein balls. That's a mouthful, but we did pack a lot of kind of interesting flavors in this recipe today. I think it's a fun one. I hope you think so too. And as we go through it, I will talk about things that you can substitute if there's an ingredient you don't have or you don't like. But you've seen me make protein balls before. I love to make these because the recipe is really versatile, because you don't have to cook them or bake them. They just go together in a bowl, or in my case in the food processor, and they're just done in a couple minutes, and they make a really, really, really good snack. So as I said, I'm going to do this one in the food processor. If you just want to do all this in a bowl, it's fine. There's a few things that you might want to chop up ahead of time, and I'll tell you about that as we go through. All right, so we are starting with our Rebuild vanilla ice cream flavor. If you don't have the vanilla, you can certainly do this one with chocolate. I'm going to put 4 scoops of our vanilla Rebuild in here. And you know, this is such a great start because already we're adding 48 grams of protein into our bowl here. And remember, what we're after with our sort of post-workout snacks is to get a good balance of protein and carbs, and we're definitely going to do that. All right, and then I'm going to use 6 scoops of Formula 1 Sport. Again, if you want to use a different flavor of Formula 1, go for it. That's totally optional, but I just wanted to stick with our 24 products today. And then I'm using a half a cup of rolled oats. Now this is the one thing I would say, if you want to do this in a bowl, what I would suggest is you at least put your rolled oats in the blender and just give them a really quick spin in the blender just to help the oats get ground up a little bit. I think that's really helpful. But other than that, you're good to go if you don't have a food processor. All right, and then I'm adding a cup of what we call golden raisins. So these are raisins that are made from a white grape rather than a dark grape. They taste the same. I just wanted to use this in our orange spice tahini turmeric protein balls because I wanted to keep the color kind of light. But you can use these. You can actually use any dried fruit that you want to. If you use a cup of dates, or you could use dried cranberries, or you could use dried apricots. I think there's a lot of variations that you could do with that. All right, now is the fun part. So now we're going to start really spicing this up. I'm starting with a teaspoon of ground turmeric, which is a beautiful yellow color. Turmeric is a really interesting spice. Aside from the fact that it's got such an interesting flavor, turmeric has compounds in it that are anti-inflammatory. And so that's one of the reasons that I wanted to use it in this recipe. It's got a compound in it called curcumin. And curcumin has these, as I say, these anti-inflammatory properties, which is a nice thing to have after a workout to help your muscles recover. In fact, all spices have some of those benefits because they're plant foods and they have phytonutrients in them. All right, so a teaspoon of turmeric. I'm adding 3/4 of a teaspoon of ground cinnamon. I'm putting in a half a teaspoon of ground ginger, a 1/4 of a teaspoon of ground cloves, and then last but not least, a 1/4 of a teaspoon of ground cardamom, which is one of my favorite spices. This is what gives chai its kind of distinctive flavor and scent, and I really like that. We've got about a tablespoon total of spice in here, so if there's any of those that you don't like, feel free to mix it up, you know, experiment, or if you don't want it as spicy, you can leave that out too. All right, and then the last thing I'm going to add is I'm going to add the grated rind from one orange. I use this, I don't know if you all have one of these at home, a little microplane. You get these at the hardware store, and they only cost a couple bucks, but they're great because the teeth are really small. And I use these all the time, so you just kind of take it and you just rub it on your orange like that, or your lemon, or whatever you want to get the peel from. I use this all the time. I use it for garlic. Pretty great little tool. Anyway, so we've got in here, I've got this grated rind of the orange. Now, what I'm going to do before I add the rest of the ingredients, I am going to pulse this a couple times in the food processor just because I want to get these mixed up just a little bit before I add the wet ingredients. So here we go. Okay, and that was just enough just to get it kind of blended up a little bit. With the raisins, by the way, you can, if you want to, if you feel like chopping, you could chop those ahead of time if you don't use the food processor, but it's not necessary. I don't really mind that some of these are still whole. All right, now here's the other kind of unusual ingredient. I'm using 6 tablespoons of tahini. And if you're not familiar with tahini, this is how I buy it in a can like this. Tahini is just simply roasted sesame seeds that have been ground up into a paste. So think of it as like peanut butter or almond butter, except that it's sesame seeds instead of nuts. And I did this, as I mentioned in the intro, because I know that some of you have nut allergies, and so I wanted to do something that didn't have any nuts. Typically, when you make these protein balls, you use peanut butter or almond butter. But tahini also has a really interesting flavor, and I thought it would be kind of fun to use that one instead. When you buy it in the can like this, it's going to separate like your natural peanut butter does, so the oil's going to float on top. But what I do when I buy it before I open it is I store it in the cupboard upside down, and what that does is it allows the oil to kind of penetrate in the other direction, so that when you open it, at least some of it is kind of sunk down to the bottom, if that makes any sense to you. And then when you open it, you just stir it up and then stick it in the refrigerator, and that'll kind of keep it from separating. But just be sure that you get plain tahini, not tahini sauce, which might have other seasonings in it, or tahini dressing. You just want plain old tahini. And you're going to see when I put this in here, it's a little soupier than peanut butter. I'm adding 6 tablespoons, and you can see it's pretty runny. So if you decide, for example, that you want to just go with peanut butter or almond butter, which is fine, what you may find is you might have to add a little bit more liquid to this. But you can see it's a little bit runnier than standard peanut butter. But it's just, sesame is so delicious. It's really mild, and it works really, really well with these spices and with the orange. So that was the reason that I did it. All right, and then the last thing, just to help hold this whole thing together, is I'm using 1/4 cup of orange juice. So just some fresh orange juice, or you can just get bottled orange juice, whatever you want. That's going to go in there. And now we're going to blend this up. What we want, or even if you're doing this in a bowl, what you're going for is you want this to just be moist enough to hold together. So I just want to caution you, because sometimes when you're doing this, you think, oh, this is never going to hold together. And then once you start forming it into balls with your hands, it does stick together. So resist the urge to add too much liquid, because you don't want these to be sticky. You just want them to hold together. So here we go. Very quickly, we're going to pulse this a little bit. Okay. And then what you want to do is just stick your fingers in here and kind of test it and pinch some of it and see if it holds together. This looks pretty good. I'm going to scrape this down just to make sure that I got all the tahini mixed in, because that's really what's holding all of this together. Can you see what a beautiful color this is, though? And that's from the turmeric, that bright yellow spice that we put in there, as well as the orange peel. And I'm feeling like this might need just a tiny bit more orange juice. I mean, a tiny bit. So if you get to that point where you're not sure, really add maybe a couple teaspoons at a time. You don't want to overdo it. So I'm just going to put a little bit more. Part of the reason, these recipes are never completely precise is because, when you measure things, sometimes you may measure, maybe you're a little bit too much on the oats. Maybe it's a really dry day. Sometimes even that can make a difference. All right, so this should work. All right, I think we're good. So all we're going to do now, yeah, you can see now this is really starting. This is like a nice, perfect little paste. All right, so now all we're going to do is turn this into some balls. You're going to get about 24 out of this recipe. And I chose not to roll these in anything. Oftentimes when you see recipes for these protein balls, they'll roll them in stuff. And when I've done them before, I'll roll them maybe in a mixture. We'll put in a little bit of our rebuild, maybe with some coconut or some cocoa or you know, ground nuts or something like that. And you can certainly do that. I tried rolling these in sesame seeds because I was kind of going off all the sesame that I was making, but I felt like it just sort of overpowered the flavor, and so I just decided to leave them plain. So they're going to be about that big. You're going to just make these into balls, they're about an inch across. If it helps, sometimes you can moisten your hands just a little bit, but this is holding together really well. It feels like modeling clay almost. It's really just perfect. All right, I'm not going to make you watch me make all these, but while I am doing this, let me just talk to you a little bit about, again, just the ingredients and why we put them in there. The Rebuild, of course, and the F1 Sport, what those are doing is not only giving us really great flavor, just a nice background base as the vanilla base for our protein balls, but also, you know, contributing quite a bit of protein. And remember that after you've had a, you know, a pretty substantial workout and your muscles are recovering, you need both protein and carbohydrate. You need protein, obviously, because your muscles have been stressed. When you work out, you actually cause little microscopic tears in your muscle. That's normal. And it's in that muscle repair process that you get muscle growth. And so in order to repair your muscles after you've been working out, you need to have plenty of protein. But at the same time, you also need to deliver some carbohydrate into your muscles, and also carbohydrate to replenish the stores that you've used up through exercise. You've got carbohydrate stored in your muscles, you have it stored in your liver, and some in your bloodstream as well. And after a hard workout, you need to replace that because you just don't store all that much. And so we've got this good balance. We've got already a good balance from the Rebuild and from the Formula One of protein and carbohydrate. And then the raisins, of course, are adding a lot of natural carbohydrate as well, since they're fruit, which is good. The spices, as I mentioned, the turmeric, the cinnamon, the ginger, the cloves, the cardamom, those are adding these anti-inflammatory compounds because, as I said, they're spices, not to mention all this really amazing flavor, because orange and spice just goes so well together. The orange rind and the orange juice, you're going to get some vitamin C, of course, from the orange juice. You're going to get a little bit of fiber. We've just packed a lot in here. And then last but not least, we put in that tahini, that sesame paste. And that's going to add some healthy fat because it's a seed. When you talk about fats from nuts or from seeds, those are good polyunsaturated fats. Those are really healthy for you. And there's some protein in sesame as well. So we've just, you know, things are always in there for a reason. And so I always like to give you all the reasons so you know what's what. All right, so I've made 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. I'd have a ways to go. As I said, I'm not going to make you watch me, but I do want you to see that these are really pretty, and they're different from what we normally have. You know, usually they're chocolate and they're dark. And I am going to taste it so I can tell you. I love the texture of these. They're nice and chewy. What I'm getting mostly is the spice blend is almost indescribable in a good way because it's just this really nice spicy blend. There's not one spice that necessarily overpowers. And then I'm getting all those nice orange notes from the orange peel. It's really, really good. It's not, the sesame flavor isn't that strong. It's just a really nice kind of background note to these protein balls. Now, if you make these and you don't eat them all right away, just put them in a covered container, put them in the refrigerator, and they'll keep for like 3 or 4 days. And that's it. Pretty simple, pretty fun, lots of versatility on this recipe, and not to mention just an amazing nutrition profile, which I will tell you as soon as we come right back. So don't go away, and I will be back to give you the nutrition information on our orange spice tahini turmeric protein balls. Don't go away.